Streams of mercy never ceasing. Call for songs of loudest.
All right, 717 question, which comes from the book of Genesis, really not connected to our study in the book of Revelation. The book of Romans. But the person who was asking the question is obviously reading through the Bible and thinking through these questions as they read through it, and that's fine. All questions are always welcome, and I'll do my best to try to give an answer to them. In this case, Genesis chapter 9, verses 18 through 27. There's a reference there to a curse by Noah on one of the grandkids, ironically, because of an event that occurs. And in there's a discussion about one will be the servant or slave of the other. And this person's asking the question, is this God endorsing slavery? Is this the beginning of an endorsement of slavery? I don't think it's an endorsement of slavery. It's a statement of what will happen. There's a lot of things in the Bible where God says this is going to happen, not an endorsement by God that it's good behavior. I'll give you an example. God predicts, prophesies that his son will be betrayed by one of his closest friends. It's a statement about something that will happen in the future. This doesn't mean God thinks that Judas did the right thing or did a good thing. It's just a statement about what will happen. In fact, God will turn it into something ultimately that is good, but the event itself is evil. And so the fact that we get God predicting slavery and, in fact, somehow telling Israel how to deal with slavery is not necessarily an endorsement by God of the slavery of one grandchild of another, or those kinds of things, but instead a statement of the human reality of these events. And so this is true of polygamy, this is true of slavery, this is true of all of these kinds of things, where I'll get individuals who will complain, see God endorses these things because they're in the Bible, but what you get in the Bible is not necessarily an endorsement by God of those kinds of things. You get the reality that that's the culture that those individuals are living in, and in that culture, how are they to deal with these kinds of things? Instead of concluding that God's endorsed them, I instead look at it and say, God matter-of-factly deals with the fact that they occur. Slavery occurred. It did occur. It occurred regularly in that culture in time and space after the Noahic flood. And we find Egypt as complete slaves, and Israel's complete slaves in Egypt, and God liberates them from there. That as indentured servitude occurs because of civil debts that can't be repaid, that God at least has rules on how that will occur and justly occur. Slavery during the time of Moses in the Exodus, in many cases, was a case of survival, that the individual attached themselves to a family that could actually make the ends meet, where that person might not be able to. And so it was the difference between starving to death, and then what are the rules of engagement if someone takes on an individual like that, like going and getting a homeless person who can't feed himself and bringing him into your home. There were rules of engagement so that the family that took them in won't be abused, and the person they took in who's working in exchange for that room and board doesn't get abused. And so I don't think it's that God desires that for humanity, but in our fallen state, these things are a reality of the fall. So if they are there, how do we deal with them? And in the case of slavery, I don't think this is an endorsement, but a statement of fact of what would actually occur. And so in American history, there were pastors even in the South who would use some of these types of things to say, see, American slavery is fine. And I would suggest to you that American slavery is a far cry from the civil punishment, the civil debts that people would build up and unable to pay for, and the kind of go to Africa, kidnap someone in human trafficking, run off with them, and force them into slavery that had no end. In the Bible, there was a year of Jubilee. All the slaves were set free. All the land was returned to the original owners. There were certain terms and conditions in which a slave had to be released. There were ways that the slave could pay both for their release and for the release of their family members. And so none of that took place in American slavery. And as some of those pastors began to look at the scripture and then compare it to what was going on in American slavery, they went, wait, none of these individuals are here because of some civil debts that they couldn't repay or because they couldn't feed themselves. They're here because someone trafficked, was functioning as human traffickers, and that's why they're here, and it's primarily an ethnic or racial undertones to it. Those are really, really different. And so the fact that it's in the Bible does not necessarily invoke an endorsement by God for that kind of behavior. So I think that's the case with slavery. I think that's the case with polygamy. There's probably other issues as well. So I think gambling may fall in that category as well. There's some other things like that as well that I would say not necessarily an endorsement by God, but just a reality of human existence. All right, we'll see you guys 7:17 this week, Romans chapter 1. We're going to delve especially in verses 16 and 17. See you then.
I'm constrained to be